Hello, I'm Tom VanAntwerp, a senior software engineer with this.labs. And today, we're going to be building a custom scroll bar with React and CSS. Let's get started. Okay, so here you can see the component that we're going to be using in action. We can pass it children with whatever we want. And over here it's rendering, and we've got this very lovely, very flamboyant custom scroll bar. This is what we're going to be building today. It is fully functional. You can click the track anywhere. You can click the up and down arrow buttons, and of course works with a scroll wheel. So when should you be building a custom scroll bar? I would actually argue almost never. Native scroll bars are very good. They are what your users typically expect. And there are a lot of little edge cases when you're trying to build one yourself. That said, there are times when maybe you really need to do something custom that the native scroll bars don't do. It is very hard to style native scroll bars. There are some CSS properties that would help, and they are still in a draft stage and currently only supported in Firefox. And they are still pretty limited. It can only really change the width of the scroll bar and give it one specific color. You could not do something very fun and custom like what we're going to be building today. So given the limitations of the existing CSS, that's why I'm going to show you how to do what it is that we're going to be doing in this tutorial. So let's start with a very basically empty React component that we're going to be working with. Right now, there's just nothing going on. We're accepting the children and we're just spitting them back out. And you can see all we have here is text on a page and native scrolling. So first, let's add some HTML to structure how our scroll bar is going to work. So this is the basic structure of our custom scroll bar. We've got a container div and a div for our content. We give the content an ID so we can use the role scroll bar and ARIA controls and pass that ID. This is an accessibility feature. We have a container for all of our scroll bar functionality. That includes buttons at the top and bottom for going up and down the page, and the track and the thumb. The track is the entire scroll bar, and the thumb is the part that you can click and drag on. We are having them as siblings, and the reason you wouldn't put the thumb inside the track, which you might think just looking at a scroll bar, oh yeah, the thumb goes inside the track. We want to keep them as siblings because of the way events propagate in the browser. If the thumb is inside the track, then clicking on the thumb is an event that also will bubble up to its parent, the track. And that can get a little confusing for handling the events. So we're just going to keep them as siblings to make it very obvious if I clicked the thumb, I did not click the track, and vice versa. Now we're going to need to start applying some CSS because, as you can see, right now we don't have very much that makes sense or is functional. First, we write some CSS for our container. I'm using CSS Grid. We are putting all of our content in this one containing component. It has exactly one row and two columns. The main content is one fractional width unit, so it'll fill up as much space as it can, and we're giving just 50 pixels to our scroll bar content. Overflow is hidden, and we are using position relative and height 100% to fill up as much space as we can. For our content container, we are adding several styles that will hide the native scroll bars. And you can see now with these styles that I can scroll up and down, but you see no scroll bar. These styles here and here are the ones that are hiding the native scroll bar. And some of these work in some browsers, some of them work in other browsers. There's no one hide the scroll bar CSS property. So we have to combine a few different ones to get this working the way that we expect. Next, we'll apply some styles to the scroll bar section itself. I'm again using CSS Grid to lay this out. We have 3 rows. The middle one is a fractional unit, so it takes up as much space as it can. And the top and bottom are where we're going to put our buttons, and they will take up as much space as they need. And you can already see that we've got a button at the top and a button at the bottom now. Next, we'll apply some styles to the container for our track and thumb and the track and thumb itself. We're using absolute positioning for the track and the thumb, so its container has to have relative positioning. This positioning is going to be important, particularly for the thumb, because changing the top property later on with JavaScript is how we're going to move the thumb around. Right now, the thumb does not have a height, so you don't see it. All you can see is the track, and we will be handling that in our JavaScript code. So the next thing we need to start doing is using refs in React to get direct access to our DOM elements. First, we'll create a ref for the content container because we're going to need to know things about how tall it is and how far scrolled down it is. After that, we'll add another ref for the track for our scroll bar, as well as yet another ref for the thumb. And you can see we're creating these refs and then we're adding them to our markup in the JSX. The next thing we should do is actually give a height to the thumb so that we can see it. We're going to keep the thumb height in state and set it to 20 pixels tall by default, and we can apply it directly to the thumb in our JSX using styles. And you can now just barely see this tiny thumb that doesn't do anything yet. Next, we're going to actually resize the thumb based on the size of the content. Created a function handle resize. It looks at the ref for the track and for the content, and it takes some information out of those. Particularly it wants to know what is the height of this track, how much content is currently visible of our content container, and how tall would the content be if we could see all of it at once. From the amount that's visible divided by the total amount of content height, we can get a sense of what percentage of this content can we currently see, and we can multiply that by the track size to get a height of the thumb that is roughly proportionate. So if we could see 20% of the content, we would end up with a thumb that is 20% the height of our track. And now we just need to apply this function. And we're going to do that with a use effect and with a resize observer. So in our use effect, as long as we have content, we're going to create one more ref, and in this ref we're going to store our resize observer, and we're going to call our resize function inside this resize observer, and we are going to be observing the size of the content. And if this content element changes in size, the thumb will change in size as well. And we can already see the thumb is much larger now. It is proportionate in height to the track size as this piece of content is to how much content there currently is. Next, let's handle the thumb position, because when we scroll, the thumb is not moving. We'll create a new function handle thumb position. We're going to get the current top position of our content and its total height. And we're going to get the height of our track. To figure out where the top edge of our thumb should be, we want to know the current top position of our content divided by the total content height to get a proportion of how far along we are in our content, and then multiply that by our track height. That will give us the number of pixels that we can assign to the top style of our absolutely positioned thumb to reposition it. And we're going to take the minimum of this new value, or the track height minus the thumb height, because we wouldn't want the thumb to fly off the end of the track. There is a limit because we're positioning it using top, and there's always a risk there that we could try and set a top that ends up with the thumb's bottom falling right off the track. And we are going to use request animation frame for a little extra performance while setting the thumb's style.top property. And now nothing happens because we haven't actually used this anywhere. We're going to have to modify our use effect from earlier. And we're going to add another event listener for the scroll event. So now when our content is scrolled, handle thumb position will be called, and you can see our thumb is moving along with our content when I scroll with the scroll wheel. Next, we're going to start handling the ability to actually click and drag on the thumb for scrolling. I'm going to add some new functions, and we're just going to stub these out. A mouse down, mouse up, and mouse move handler. And we add another use effect and add event listeners to the document. And just a note, in React, it's fairly abnormal to use add event listener. We are doing it a lot here because we are dealing a lot directly with DOM elements. So when we added an event listener to our content, it's because we are directly accessing that content element in the DOM because we're using refs and not referring to React elements. Just making a note of that you can see in these handler functions how the mouse up and mouse move functions, which we add as event listeners to the document, they are typed in TypeScript as mouse events. The handle thumb mouse down function, however, is a React mouse event. And that's because this one we're assigning directly to the thumb for when we click on it. We also are adding states, and these states are going to be useful for when we're clicking and dragging the thumb. We want to know a few things. One is, are we currently dragging the thumb? We want to know where in the document we were when we started clicking. What was specifically the Y coordinate of the mouse within the browser window? This is going to be useful for calculating how far we need to move. And we want to know what was the initial position of the content's scroll top property. How far down were we in our content? So first, let's write our handle thumb mouse down function. Fairly straightforward. For the event, we're preventing default and stopping any propagation. We don't need any of that. We're going to set our scroll start position to the event's client Y property. That's where we were on the Y-axis in the page. And we're going to set our initial content scroll top to what the content's current scroll top property is. And we're going to say that we are now dragging. Next, we'll handle what happens when we release the mouse. Very simple, again, prevent default and stop propagation, and we can set is dragging to false. We're also going to add some styles to the CSS directly on some elements to make it a little clearer what we're doing. So if we're dragging and we happen to move the mouse a little fast and go over the track, we'll see a grabbing cursor. Otherwise, there's no cursor style. But particularly for the thumb, if we're dragging, we'll have the grabbing cursor, and if not, we'll have the option to grab cursor. And so I hover over the thumb now, you can see the little hand, and when I click down, you can just barely see the fingers of the hand have clenched the thumb. So now we get to the interesting part, actually handling what happens when we click and drag on the thumb, what happens when we move our mouse. Again, we check if we're dragging, we should be, and we're going to get the height of the visible section and the total of our content. We're going to calculate what I'm calling delta y. We're just trying to get a difference in position of where is the mouse now, what is the client y of the current event, minus where did we start? What was the position we were in when we first started dragging? And we're going to multiply that by the client height, or divided by the thumb height. The reason we're doing it this way is because the amount that we're dragging the thumb is not directly the amount that we want to scroll the content. The track is much shorter than the total content, and 1 pixel dragging a thumb does not equate to 1 pixel scrolling the content. So we want to get a change that's taking into account the ratio of thumb height to the content client height. Then we set the new scroll top of our content to be the lesser of its initial position plus the change, or the scroll height minus the client height, which would be as far down as you can scroll. And then we just set the new scroll top. And now, when we click and drag on the thumb, our content scrolls. Next, we're going to write a function to handle what happens when we click in the track. Because if you click in the track of a scroll bar, you expect to jump up to that position. And we're going to add handle track click to our track, and here's our function. What we're doing here is getting our track and our content and checking where did we click on the page. Again, what is the y coordinate of where we clicked? This is a little bit trickier than when we were clicking the thumb and scrolling, because this one's a little trickier than when we were clicking and dragging the thumb. We need to find the absolute y position of the track itself so that we can use the absolute y position of our mouse when we clicked. We also need to take into account an offset of our thumb height, because we don't want the top of the thumb to go where we clicked in the track. We want roughly the middle of the thumb to go where we clicked. So we can take our y position from the click, subtract out where the top of the track was, so we know basically how many pixels we were from the top of the track itself, and add in our thumb offset to subtract just a little bit so that we know roughly where the middle of the thumb should be. And then we divide all of that by the height of the track itself so that we have a percentage of how far down the track we're trying to go. Then to get the absolute scroll amount of the content, because remember, we're not trying to move the thumb. The thumb is being moved by another function on its own. We're really wanting to scroll the content. So we want to know the ratio that we just calculated, how far down the track we clicked, multiplied by the total height of the content. And then we use the scroll to method to scroll that location. We use the scroll to method on content to scroll to that location and to make it smooth. And now I can click into the track and you'll see that we smoothly scroll through the content. Last but not least, we'll add one more function for our buttons. This one is pretty simple. We're just going to have this take a direction up or down so that we can use it with either one. And we're going to scroll by a fixed amount depending on the direction. And we're again using scroll by with smooth behavior. Easiest one we've had to write so far. And we just, on our buttons, for onClick, handle scroll button up or down. And now we can also click our buttons to scroll by a predictable amount. And with that, we've finished building our totally custom scroll bar in React. I hope you've learned a lot from this video and that it was useful to you. Thank you very much for watching, and come back and check out our channel again. We have a lot of great tutorials, great advice about programming, and don't hesitate to reach out to us at this.labs if you have any questions or want our help. Thank you, and have a good day. Bye.
This program is presented by This.Labs, a framework-agnostic consulting firm helping enterprises realize their technical goals through staff augmentation, consulting, project management, on-demand subject experts, training, and other professional services. Find out more at This.Labs.com.